It started as another conversation about the growing distance between us. One of those tense, low-voiced exchanges that had become routine. I wasn't asking for much, just trying to address something that had been gnawing at me for years. The lack of intimacy, both emotional and physical, had turned our marriage into something that felt more like a business partnership than a relationship. I wanted connection. She, on the other hand, seemed perfectly fine without it. I don't know what I expected from her that night, an acknowledgement, a compromise, maybe even a little resistance. But what I got instead was a phrase that settled into my bones like ice. Closeness is optional. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. No emotion, no hesitation, just a simple, factual statement like she was explaining a policy, not talking about our marriage. I almost laughed, not because it was funny but because I couldn't believe it had come to this. I repeated the words back to her, half expecting her to correct herself, to backtrack, to say she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But she didn't. She just looked at me with that calm, detached expression, as if the conversation had already drained her and she wanted it to be over. That was when something inside me shifted. For years, I had been the one trying to fix things, the one initiating conversations, offering solutions, trying to remind us both that what we had was worth saving. I had told myself that marriages went through phases, that we were just in a rough patch. I convinced myself that if I tried a little harder, if I was more patient, if I gave it time, things would improve. But that night, as I stood there staring at the woman I had built a life with, I realized I was the only one still holding on. Closeness is optional. That was the permission slip I didn't know I needed. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't desperate to make her see things my way. I just felt done. If closeness was optional, then so was everything else. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain why that statement hurt. Instead, I nodded, a simple, quiet nod because there was nothing left to say. And in that moment, something became clear to me. I had been negotiating my own worth in this marriage. I had spent years trying to prove that I deserved love, that I deserved attention, that I deserved to feel wanted. I had made my own value conditional on her willingness to give me what I needed. That stopped that night. She must have noticed the change in my face because for a brief second, her expression flickered, something between confusion and curiosity. Maybe she expected me to keep pushing. Maybe she had gotten so used to my frustration that she didn't know how to react when it wasn't there. But I didn't push. I didn't say another word. I turned, walked to the bedroom and closed the door behind me. That was the last night I asked for anything. The next morning something felt different. Not in the world around me, everything looked the same. The coffee pot still gurgled in the kitchen, the morning light still filtered in through the blinds, and she still sat at the table, scrolling through her phone like she did every other day. But inside me something had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anything. I wasn't waiting for a change of heart. I wasn't waiting for a conversation that might never come. I wasn't waiting for the scraps of affection I had conditioned myself to be grateful for. She didn't look up when I walked in. Normally, I would have at least attempted some small talk, trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But today, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. I poured my coffee, grabbed my keys, and left for work without a word. And just like that, I stopped trying. At first, my new approach felt unnatural. After years of reaching, of trying to make things work, of bending myself in 100 different directions to accommodate the slow unraveling of our relationship, doing nothing felt strange. But it also felt good. It felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for far too long. I stopped initiating conversations that only led to nowhere. I stopped lingering around her, hoping she'd engage with me. And more importantly, I stopped structuring my life around the idea that she was supposed to be my source of happiness. Instead, I turned that focus inward. I dusted off my old guitar, the one I hadn't touched in years, and let my fingers fumble over chords I used to know by heart. I started running again. Not just to escape, but because I remembered how much I used to love the way it cleared my mind. I reconnected with friends I had slowly drifted away from. Not because of some dramatic falling out, but because I had gradually made my world smaller and smaller, narrowing it down to a marriage that had long stopped giving back to me. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing anything. I came and went as I pleased. I stayed late at work without worrying if it would upset her. I made plans without checking in. I stopped weighing my words, stopped calculating my actions, stopped caring whether or not she noticed me pulling away. And the funny thing? She did notice. Not right away, but little by little, the cracks started to show. She would glance at me when I didn't acknowledge her presence in the ways I used to. She would make offhand comments about how I seemed different. Once she even asked if something was wrong. I just shrugged. Closeness is optional. She didn't respond to that. There were no arguments, no dramatic confrontations. Just a slow, steady shift in the dynamic. I wasn't playing a game. I wasn't trying to make her jealous or manipulate her into seeing my worth. I had simply stopped accepting a marriage where I had to beg for connection. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. At first, she didn't take my change seriously. She assumed it was a phase. Maybe she thought I was sulking, trying to make a point, waiting for her to react so I could pull her into another exhausting discussion about what was wrong with our marriage. But I wasn't waiting for anything. That's what made this different from every other time. A week passed, then another. She watched as I moved through the house like a man who had finally decided to occupy his own space rather than tiptoe around hers. I wasn't cold. I wasn't cruel. I was just indifferent. I spoke to her when necessary, but I didn't reach beyond that. If she made a comment, I responded with a simple answer. No extra effort, no attempt to stretch the moment into something meaningful. For the first time, I treated her the way she had been treating me for years. At first, she didn't react much. She still moved through her days like nothing had changed, still spent hours scrolling through her phone, still gave me the same passive, absent-minded presence she always had. But something was different now, and I could feel it. Before, when I had been the one trying, there was a balance. She had been the one with the upper hand, the one who got to choose when and how we interacted, the one who decided when I was worthy of attention. But now that power was slipping. She started watching me more closely. I caught her looking at me across the dinner table, waiting for me to say something that never came. I noticed the small hesitations before she left the room, like she expected me to call her back, to ask her something, to engage. But I didn't. One night, she lingered in the hallway outside the bedroom while I sat on the edge of the bed, tuning my guitar. She hadn't done that in years, just stood there watching me like she was trying to figure something out. "You've been quiet lately," she said. I kept tuning the guitar. Yes, silence stretched between us, heavy and unfamiliar. "Are you upset?" That made me pause. I looked up at her, considering the question. Was I upset? Maybe once, maybe for years. But now? No, I said simply. I think that answer unsettled her more than if I had yelled, accused, demanded answers. She waited like she expected me to say more. I didn't. She left the room. I don't know what she expected to happen. Maybe she thought I would break eventually, that my patience would run out and I'd come crawling back to the old routine, pleading, negotiating, making myself small for the sake of keeping the peace. Maybe she thought this was just another cycle, another storm to wait out. But the truth was there was no storm. I wasn't playing a game, I wasn't testing her, I had just made a decision. I wasn't going to live in a marriage where I was the only one trying, and if she thought I would fold, she was wrong. At first, she seemed content to let things stay as they were. If my distance bothered her, she didn't show it. She still scrolled through her phone at dinner, still spent her evenings in the other room, half watching TV, half existing. Maybe she thought we had simply reached the next stage of whatever this marriage had become, two people occupying the same space, bound by routine rather than connection. But something had shifted, and it wasn't just me. I could tell because of the silence. Before, the silence between us had been thick with unspoken frustrations, the kind of tension that made it impossible to relax in your own home. But now the silence was different. It wasn't filled with resentment or lingering arguments. It was empty, hollow, a void where something used to be. I think she expected to feel relief. No more exhausting discussions about our problems. No more pressure to engage. No more attempts on my part to pull something out of her that she wasn't willing to give. Maybe in her mind this was supposed to be easier. But it wasn't, because now there was nothing left to fight against. No conflict, no push and pull, just the eerie, unmistakable absence of something that had once existed between us. And she felt it. I saw it in the way she hesitated before leaving a room, like she was waiting for me to stop her. I saw it in the way she'd glance at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, trying to gauge if I was truly done, or just pretending. I saw it in the way she started filling the silence with meaningless comments, like she was testing the waters, trying to see if she could still pull me back into the old rhythm. But I didn't take the bait. One night as I was reading in bed, she sat on the edge of her side, staring at the floor. She stayed there for a long time, like she was working up the courage to say something. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than usual. "Are you happy?" It was such a simple question, yet it caught me off guard. A few months ago, I would have jumped at the opportunity to talk. I would have poured out everything I had been holding in, hoping that maybe this time she'd actually listen. But now I didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. I closed my book and looked at her. "I don't know," I said honestly. She nodded slowly as if she expected that answer, but didn't know how to process it. She didn't ask anything else. She just sat there for a while, shoulders slumped, staring at the floor like it had the answer she was looking for, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something in her that I hadn't seen before. Worry. Not the passive, surface-level concern she had shown in the past, the kind that faded as quickly as it appeared. No, this was something deeper, more unsettled, like she had just realized, maybe for the first time, that this wasn't a temporary shift. This was real, and I wasn't coming back to the way things were. The tension in the house had changed. It was no longer the quiet indifference she had once been comfortable with. Now it was something unsettled, something raw. I could feel it in the way she moved around me, in the way she lingered in doorways as if deciding whether or not to say something. I could feel it in the way her eyes stayed on me just a second too long, as if she was searching for something she wasn't sure how to name. She was waiting for me to break, she was waiting for me to crack, to reach for her, to fill the space between us like I had always done before. But that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just done being the one who cared more. I think she realized it fully one evening when I came home later than usual. I had stopped giving explanations for where I was going or what I was doing. Not out of spite, but because I no longer felt like I owed it to her. If closeness was optional, then so was reporting my every move. She was already in the kitchen when I walked in, a glass of wine in her hand. The sight of me made her pause like she had been deep in thought and I had interrupted it. "You've been out a lot lately," she said. There was something different in her voice. It wasn't casual. It wasn't disinterested. It almost sounded hesitant. I shrugged, setting my keys down on the counter. "Yeah." She waited as if expecting me to say more. When I didn't, she let out a slow breath and set her glass down. "Is this how it's going to be now?" I turned to look at her, really look at her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't hiding behind detached indifference. Her mask had slipped, even if just a little. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She crossed her arms. You barely talk to me. You're always somewhere else. You act like I don't even exist." I let her words settle in the air between us. "I'm just treating you the way you told me to." Her brows furrowed. "What? Closeness is optional." The moment I said it, I saw something shift in her expression. It was like she had been slapped with her own words, words she had once spoken so easily, so carelessly, words she had thought would go unanswered. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time she looked uncertain. I didn't move. I didn't try to soften the impact. I just let her sit with it. She swallowed hard, arms still crossed but shoulders tense now. "That's not what I meant." I tilted my head slightly. "Oh, then tell me what you did mean." She let out a breath, frustrated now, but not at me, at herself, at the situation she had helped create. She shook her head. "I didn't think it would get to this point." Neither did I. For a long moment we just stood there. Her eyes searched mine, looking for something, anything that would give her reassurance that I wasn't really done, that this was just another phase, another argument, another moment that would pass, but I wasn't giving her that reassurance. She finally broke the silence, voice quieter now. "What happens next?" It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. For the first time, she wasn't assuming she had control over the outcome. I exhaled slowly and met her gaze. "That depends." Her throat moved as she swallowed. "On what?" I took my time with my answer because I wanted her to hear it fully, to understand it without any room for misinterpretation. "On whether or not you think this marriage is still something worth choosing." I didn't say anything else. I didn't fill the silence. Because for the first time, it wasn't my decision alone to make. She didn't answer right away. For a long moment, she just stood there, arms crossed tightly, eyes locked on mine like she was searching for an escape route that no longer existed. But there wasn't one. Not this time. I had given her the choice, the same choice she had once so carelessly handed to me. Only now she understood what it meant. I could see it in the way her posture shifted, the way her breathing grew shallower. This wasn't just another disagreement. This wasn't something she could brush off or deflect until I got tired of fighting. She had spent years believing I would always be there, always trying, always chasing. And now for the first time, she was realizing that wasn't true anymore. Finally, she inhaled sharply, exhaled even slower. "I don't want to lose this." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't an emotional plea or a desperate attempt to pull me back in. They were quiet, almost hesitant, like she was saying them aloud for the first time and wasn't sure how they would sound. I studied her, waiting for her to continue. She ran a hand through her hair, shaking her head slightly. "I thought." She stopped, corrected herself. "I convinced myself that the way things were was enough, that you would always be here, no matter how distant I was. I thought you'd keep trying." "I did." Her jaw tensed. "I know." Silence settled between us again, but this time it wasn't cold. It wasn't the empty silence we had lived in for so long. This was something else, something heavier, a moment that neither of us could ignore. She let out another breath like she was gathering courage. I was wrong. I waited because I needed to hear more. I wasn't interested in half apologies or vague acknowledgments. I had spent too many years accepting the bare minimum. She must have realized that because when she spoke again, her voice was steadier. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know where to start. But if you're willing to try, I want to try too. I watched her, looking for signs of hesitation, for anything that told me she was saying this just because she was afraid of being alone. But what I saw in her face wasn't fear. It was something closer to understanding. For the first time she saw things clearly. I let her words settle before I spoke. This only works if it's a choice, every day, not just when you're afraid of losing me. She nodded. I know. I studied her for a long moment before responding. Then we don't go back to how things were. We start over, from the beginning. She swallowed hard as if the weight of that reality was only just hitting her. Okay. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a declaration of love or a dramatic reconciliation. It was a decision, and for the first time in years, it wasn't just mine to make. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. What do you think? Was she hiding something, or was it just bad timing? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more crazy stories. See you in the next one.